Hello, YouTube. Welcome back to the Dear Future PharmD Talkshow. We hope you enjoy our content so far. In episode 4 today, we'll feature two great guests that work with in the Orange County Pharmacists Association, also known as OCPHA, and the Legislative Committee. We have Dr. Azita Alipour, who's an associate professor at Marshall B. Ketchum University. Dr. Alipour, we're so glad to have you here with us today.
Thank you for having me, Ryan.
And we also have Kathryn, who is currently a P3 student at USC, who I also got to know through OCPHA. Kathryn, glad to have you here today with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, thank you both for taking your time out of your busy day today and come on to our show. Without further ado, let's get this started. So, Dr. Alipour, let's have you just take away with your pharmacy journey so far.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I started pharmacy school all the way back in 2004. So it was a very different type of climate than it is currently in pharmacy. And back then, even in undergrad, before I started pharmacy school, I did my undergrad at UCSD. And I got to do this really unique experience where I got to shadow a psychiatric pharmacist and see what they do. And I knew ever since then, I wanted to be a psychiatric pharmacist. So when I went to pharmacy school in 2004 at UOP up in Northern California, and back then there was maybe a handful of pharmacy schools. So I think the newest one at that time was UCSD. And for the way that the job market was back then too was a lot of my classmates, they were taking the sign-on bonuses. So there was $30,000 sign-on bonuses and other things that they were giving out to try to, because there was such a shortage. And I knew I didn't want to do just one, but two residencies. So I did the opposite of most of my classmates. I went on and did both of those residencies. And it is something for me that having gone through and I know I got my specialty. I've been in my specialty now. It's over a decade. I feel like I haven't worked a day in my life because I truly love what I do. I get to do the most fun things in terms of in psychiatric pharmacy. It's like a puzzle, and that's what I love about it. So there's not one right way to approach the patient, and it's very patient specific. So you gotta like solve that puzzle. And when you do, it's like I made magic. And so I started out my career after residency as a clinical psychiatric pharmacist. So I was purely clinical. I was the only psychiatric pharmacist for Kaiser Permanente of the Mid-Atlantic states. So I covered Maryland, DC, and Northern Virginia. I had over 40 psychiatrists I was responsible for. And so I was in that position for about 7 or 8 years. And then from there, I transitioned to academia. So I was faculty at Rutgers in New Jersey before moving back home here to Southern California. And I have been at Marshall B. Ketchum University in the College of Pharmacy, in the Department of Pharmacy Practice since 2017. And my practice site is here at St. Joseph Hospital in Orange, California.
Sounds great. Definitely, I think it's a very, very unique journey. You're crossing across the whole country for your residency as well. So now, Kathryn, I think, would you like to describe a little about your introduction to pharmacy?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Dr. Alipour is such an inspiration, knowing exactly what she wanted to do prior to pharmacy school and then going for it and being incredibly successful. I wish I knew exactly what I was going to go into, but I think that kind of plays into my journey a little bit. So I started off, I did a program called Running Start. I'm originally from Washington, and so that's where you could take your last 2 years of high school and take community college classes instead. So back in high school, I really wanted to go to vet school, and so I was taking all my science classes, finished my associate's degree at the same time I finished high school, and then transitioned to Portland State University to, keep on the path to vet school. In my spare time, I rode horses, worked with hounds, and really, loved animals. It's very much a part of me and my passion. Did 1 quarter at Portland State, and I was taking upper division sciences and said, this is not the place for me. And I left. And so then, looking, okay, what do? I was going to go to vet school. Didn't like the vibes at Portland State. Sorry, anybody who goes to Portland State. And then transitioned to a small liberal arts school called Evergreen State College. Finished up my bachelor's there in molecular biology and was looking at maybe research. And in that time after undergrad, just trying to find a job and figure out my next step, I ended up working in veterinary medicine, focusing and spent some time in mixed animal practice. So we saw pigs, cats, dogs, horses, whatever walked in, ducks, and then transitioned to specialty surgery for dogs and cats, and spent 3 years working in veterinary medicine before coming to pharmacy school. Made the decision to come to pharmacy school because I really wanted to, still loved medicine, but there was just so much more to explore in human medicine than I felt there was in veterinary medicine. I was working at a really big top tier practice and just kind of wanted to see what else was out there in medicine. So came to pharmacy school, started pharmacy school in 2020, COVID pandemic times, and spent my whole first year of pharmacy school online. And now currently working as an intern at USC Arcadia Hospital as an inpatient intern, and have just been trying to explore every facet of pharmacy to figure out where it is I fit in the whole space. So it's definitely a non-traditional journey coming into pharmacy school compared to a lot of people who are like pharmacy undergrad straight into grad school. But I don't know. I enjoyed my journey that I've taken, as windy as it has been.
Yeah, definitely sounds wonderful. I haven't ever seen someone who's, so much love for the animals, then suddenly, having the guts to, go for pharmacy. And it's very much interesting. It's very intriguing the fact, I have personally never felt like switching fields. I may think Dr. Alipour might have the same feeling as well. And this is what I think makes a great, unique journey. And really understanding what looking into different fields of pharmacy and looking into how some of these past experiences have really benefited your current experiences in pharmacy so far. So that definitely sounds great. Any comments, Dr. Alpour?
Yeah, I was just going to say, and thank you, Kathryn, for sharing that amazing story. And I'm always like continuously inspired, by both of you and all that you do. And that your journey sounds like such a unique journey. And on top of all the legislative stuff that you do, you're working as an intern, you're doing all these amazing things. So I also wanted to comment on your veterinary background. So one of my closest friends who used to be a colleague with me, she actually left academia and moved up to Northern California. It's purely clinical now. Her background was veterinary before coming into pharmacy, and she also went to USC. I don't know if you know Dr. McCall Mangura, but she's someone, if you're interested in veterinary pharmacy, that's somebody that would be nice to have a conversation with and kind of see, because there is that pathway. There's a lot of different pathways that we can go into pharmacy. So if you still have a passion for it, that's also an area to consider.
Yeah, no, I think that one of the things that, I will always have a place in my heart for veterinary medicine. And I really, I think that I've kind of like was super involved, swung the pendulum the other way. I was like, what else is out there? Like, I've kind of seen the vet med thing. And so I'm just like polar opposite. What else is out there? And I definitely feel like someday this pendulum might swing back, but I don't know that I'm necessarily ready for that yet. One of my things that I said is I wanted a job where I can enjoy my animals outside of work. Definitely veterinary is, and I feel like most professional careers are definitely something that you're kind of married to. But with a lot of my friends who are, very successful vets, they're, you know, for large animals, slogging through muddy fields at 3 o'clock in the morning to, take care of an animal that needed help. And so I was looking at how much time I had left in school, and I was like, I don't know that I want to be slogging through a field at 3 o'clock in the morning for any animal that's not my animal. But there are definitely a lot of pathways. And so I think, it's just kind of part of the exploration that I could see myself going back to veterinary pharmacy. But I think I would probably want to do it in a more clinical space. So in an inpatient hospital. And most of those are at the, universities. So like, UC Davis, Washington State University, Oregon State University, are really, as of right now in the veterinary pharmacy landscape, the main places where jobs exist for clinical veterinary pharmacists rather than just compounding. And most of them are in the middle of nowhere. So, if I want to move home to the Pacific Northwest, Corvallis and Pullman are not necessarily places that I want to settle down for the rest of my life, as much as they're great. So but it's all exploring what it is that makes you happy, what you want out of life, because sometimes the job is perfect, but what comes along with the job isn't necessarily something that, you want to do. And so it's trying to find something that gives you a happy level ground for everything, and, finding that perfect job or perfect for you.
Yeah, and I wanted to piggyback off of that is that, you know, sometimes you even go into it thinking there's one area that you love, but then once you get exposure to different areas of pharmacy, that you might discover, no, there's something I'm more passionate about. And I think that's the big takeaway is if we have anybody like with the listeners right now, is that, most people when they associate pharmacy, they just think of retail, but there's so many different areas to go into in pharmacy. And so that's something that I think most people aren't aware of. And then once you go into pharmacy school, you find that area you're passionate about. It just goes back to what I was saying is like, I literally have felt like I haven't worked a day in my life, even though I work more days than most people, is that because I love what I do so much that it doesn't feel like work. So, and that's what you want to strive for is to have a job where it doesn't feel like a job. So,
Yeah, it definitely sounds great. I think that's we're all here, Um, yeah, so I think going back to Dr. Alpour, were there any particular memorable experience during your residency in psychiatric pharmacy or even during your current practice right now?
well, thank you for those questions. It's each residency has its own different experiences. Like a PGY1 is has, and depending on the type of PGY1, so a postgraduate year one residency is more generalized, so you get exposure to all different sorts of areas. And mine was at the Veterans Hospital in Boise. So I did that in 2007, 2008. And during my residency experience, I staffed the pharmacist run clinic. So under collaborative practice, I managed complicated diabetes patients, patients living with hypertension, obesity. So we had different clinics that were all run by pharmacists. So once the patients received a diagnosis by their doctor, they were referred to our clinic. And these are all veterans in the VA system. And the pharmacist was the provider managing that condition. And it was really nice to have that longitudinal follow up with the patients and really see improvement in their conditions that you're managing. So that was a unique experience in itself. And then my PGY2 was at University of Maryland School of Pharmacy, and the sites where I rotated through were all the state facilities. But in particular, my most memorable one that I remember is my rotation at Hopkins, and it was on a pain psych unit. And I'll never forget these patients that came in with pain conditions, and they were being titrated off of opioids and onto psychotropics. And then that was managing their pain and their mental health at the same time. And that's what really got me into wanting to find alternatives, because we do have an opioid epidemic currently, right? Alternatives to opioids for pain management, because I see the other end. I see all the patients with substance use disorders get admitted to, right now my practice side is an inpatient setting, and patients get admitted for detox on top of mental health conditions. So one of my big passions is helping people living with substance use disorders, and then finding alternatives to prevent substance use disorders from occurring, or not putting them at risk for that condition worsening or happening. So those are kind of some of the memorable things. And I do have one story. I don't know if you're going to ask me about this question, but one of the most unique things relating to my PGY2 has been one of my students who, has a huge passion for psych and knew they wanted to do psych. Kind of reminded me of me, and she just ended up doing her PGY2 at where I did my PGY2, and then we were at a dinner with all of us. So my old residency director is now her residency director. It's just so nice to see that transition where you go from having been the learner to now the people you trained going and kind of walking in those paths and being out there and helping people. So I won't ever forget, my residency director was like, "Oh, how do you know this person?" I'm like, "I was her teacher. I taught her all her psych stuff she knows." So it's an amazing thing.
Yeah, definitely sounded great. By being able to connect with so much, like their teacher, I think it's definitely very very unique. And I guess, Kathryn, do you have some sort of similar experience like that at USC, or do you have some other experience that really helped you through your journey in pharmacy so far?
Yeah, no, I think that the professors can have a huge impact on, how we develop. And I, professors who are faculty at pharmacy schools have so many things that they have to manage, staying in clinical practice and doing research and teaching us, serving on committees. And so they have a lot on their plate. So those professors that really take the time, like Dr. Alipour, to like make connections with students and be a friend and be a, mentor, are hugely impactful. I know that my cardio professor at school, he's kind of been that for me, where just I had my 2-week hospital IPI rotation with him over the summer in the cardiac ICU, and just like the level of clinical knowledge and impact that he brings to the team, and making medication decisions, rather than after the prescription's been written saying, can we do this? Like working with the team to create a solid treatment plan, by bringing in the pharmacist, like alternative training. Like we're trained as pharmacists, med students are, trained as physicians, and like bringing those two entirely different perspectives together. So professors in pharmacy school, just whatever pharmacy school, are just incredibly amazing humans. And yeah, if you find one that like really supports you, you want to make sure that you support them too. And try to be there and really work hard to learn. I think that this year it's been also like cardio's also had a special place in my heart for pharmacy school, because it's the first time that my class has ever been in a classroom going to class all together. Our whole first year we were online, never saw each other. I met a bunch of my classmates P2 year when we got to have our white coat ceremony and got to see them for the first time in person, even though we'd been friends for a year. So it's like pen pals meeting almost. And then but all last year we were split into groups for social distancing. So we had group A and group B, and so you didn't really see the people who were in the other group. this year we're all going to school all together. And so like, I'm reuniting with friends that were in group B that I didn't really ever see because we didn't like get to go to school together. So I think that's just kind of been really cool milestones that's only feels really applicable to my class because, of our unique COVID situation. And so, but that's been really cool to be able to, spend time with them. And I feel like I'm really appreciative of the time that we get to spend together now that we're going into our last year of didactics, and we're all going to be going on Appy soon. So yeah, those have been pretty memorable milestones for me.
Yeah, definitely sounds great. Oh, Dr.
Oh,
Alipour,
I was just going to chime in and say, Kathryn, so the professors, like I think most of us, I don't want to speak for all professors, but we enjoy in person better. I'm the type that like feeds off of an audience. So if I'm speaking to a screen and doing a recording, it's not the same. So I like to see like the nonverbal feedback. Like if I'm losing you guys, I will like shift the way I'm teaching, So and then just getting that interaction back and forth is such a big difference than the online stuff. So yeah, I'm very happy we're back in person this year as well.
Oh yeah, being in person is a huge change, and it's so much easier to learn with people. Like I think the thing is like sciences in general I've always considered a team sport, like undergrad all the way through pharmacy school. Like it's not something that like you do alone. Like team studying, team like commiserating after tests, it's definitely um you know a social process going through learning everything that we have to learn.
So yeah, that's great. I think we can also touch on a little bit about legislative work, how both of you got into being a part of the OCPHA legislative committee, and how is there any moment of realization that you were able to figure that you can make a change to pharmacy through legislative means, or is there any like biggest takeaway points for the work so far that we have done in OCPHA? I can start off with Dr. Alipour first.
All right, thank you, Ryan. So, um, you know, legislative work is fairly new to me in the last couple of years. So I'll briefly just touch on where I had concentrated my efforts previously, and kind of like now where I'm, how that made me see like this is also an important area that I really want to make an impact on. So, um, as a psychiatric pharmacist, the main organization is the College of Psychiatric and Neurologic Pharmacists. So, I have throughout my career held numerous leadership positions within the organization. I was chair of their student committee nationally. I'm currently on their foundation board. I am their vice chair for DEI, will be chair in the future, and I've held other numerous leadership positions within that organization. So I had really put my efforts into my specialty. But then going into academia and being an educator, one of the things for me is, I have students that not all of them are going to be going into something like a clinical position or something like that, right? And then seeing how some things are impacting our profession. And I want, if I'm helping educate students to go out into the profession, I really wanted to make a change to make certain areas of practice better for them than some of the current climate is. Like reimbursement has gone severely down since when I was in pharmacy school. So there's not a lot of independent pharmacies, or it's hard to survive with PBMs and all of these things. So, wanting provider status nationally for just different areas. So, I really decided I wanted to do something in advocacy, and I had never even been in this area. I'm not a I'm not a lawyer. I know we have one on our meetings as a PharmD JD. I'm not anything like that, but I'm somebody who has a passion, and I want to make that difference so that my students, when they go out into these areas, it's the best working conditions possible for them. So, so I started on the ledge committee with like very green, not knowing much. And very quickly, I was able to learn and educate myself. And I had really good guidance. Dr. Micah Hada has been doing it for a very long time. And he's out actually in that retail setting that I am not in. So it's really nice to have had some people who are already doing it and learning from them and really seeing your voice be heard. So I think I was really nervous the first time I scheduled a visit with a legislator. So we meet with our local representatives, our state senators and assembly members, and advocate for certain bills. And one of them, with one of my own legislator, I was able to see the bill we advocated for actually passed. It was on quotas to help take away quotas as something that, let's say you're a pharmacist and a chain tells you, well, you have to fill a certain amount of prescriptions in a certain amount of time, or you have to do this. So it was taking away business quotas because they get in the way of you being able to practice and safely. And so Senator Newman was the sponsor of that bill. I got to do something similar to what you're doing with us, Ryan, but I got to record my first podcast and it was with him. So I interviewed him and just seeing how our local legislators actually want to hear from us and that we can make a difference. So the bill passed and we've worked on others. And so it's just a whole different field. And I know some people might be hesitant because you're like, I don't know much about it, but I went into it not knowing much. And I feel like we are making a difference. So I think some of the reasons our profession doesn't have some of the privileges some of the other professions do, even though we're so qualified to do these things, like being recognized as providers nationally, that is advocacy. These other organizations, other professions have huge advocacy power. And as pharmacists, I think we're so siloed in things that we forget that this is something where we can truly make a difference and improve our own working conditions. So sorry, I didn't mean to go off on a whole tangent about that, but so that's how I got into advocacy.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I kind of did a similar thing. Coming into pharmacy school, there's a lot of different leadership positions that you can take in student organizations or student chapters of national organizations. And so one of the positions that I took last year was Director of Legislative Affairs at USC. And my position fell under a lot of different national organizations. Our two state organizations, CPHA and CSHP, and then their national counterparts, APHA and ASHP. And so my legislative position covered those four different organizations. And so I didn't know anything about legislative. Like, why would there be a leadership position for this if it's not important? And so just literally went in not knowing anything, and kind of got lucky that at the same time I was part of the Orange County CPHA mentorship program. And my mentor was Dr. Hada, who Dr. Alipour mentioned. And so he was really involved in legislation. And so part of the mentorship program was getting involved in the committees within OCPHA. And so, I had just taken this Director of Legislative Affairs position. I was like, why don't we do the legislative committee? Because then, the two, I'll get to learn more in both ways and maybe they'll kind of connect down the road. So the Orange County legislative meetings are very much like grassroots, meeting with local legislators and in the community and how can we make a difference, taking that community experience and having it inform the state level decision makers. Because those state decision makers are spread throughout the state and have offices at the local level. So it was really cool to see how those connections started being made in OCPHA and the type of discussions that we were having and just absorbing that. And then through my Director of Legislative Affairs position, I hosted a couple of events. We had our legislative day and just teaching pharmacy students about why it's important to kind of unite, like Dr. Alipour was saying, and just be on the same page that, we are very clinically trained, and like having the legislation support that. And then also, emerging legislation was another event that I hosted, where I invited students from all the pharmacy schools, and we just went through new bills that impact pharmacy that were, in the 2022, like new bills that were presented. And it took almost 2 hours just to go through and say a little tiny thing about each bill that impacted pharmacy. I thought it was going to be this whole discussion of, this bill, and talk about that bill for 20 minutes, and then this bill, talk about it for 20 minutes. It took almost 2 hours just to go through, there was probably 50 plus bills that could impact our profession. Not all of them are going to go through and become law, but it's really interesting that every single year there can be a lot of things that impact how we practice because of a legislative change. And so being aware that, whether you want to know about legislation or not, it could very heavily impact your day-to-day practice. And then at the end of the year last year, I got to go to the APHA House of Delegates for the student chapter. So there's student representatives from every school, and then some of the other pharmacy organizations. And we presented policies that we thought were important. And we're in this big stage auditorium with big fancy lights, and there's lots of people, and then there's an audience with other students and pharmacists behind us. And then we present these policies, and then if there's an edit to the policy, you go up to a microphone and you say your recommendation. And so I recommended an amendment that got accepted and then passed. And then, we accepted that policy and passed it on to APHA. And it was just really crazy and surreal to be in a position where it's I'm in a room full of students representing, I'm representing my whole pharmacy school, and we're making changes on a national organization level. And so that was a really crazy, cool experience that I'm glad I got to have. And it, just kind of showed how, even not knowing anything about legislation, I didn't necessarily have a plan to do that at the beginning of the year. It's just kind of opportunities pop up, and it's just how you take advantage of them. And it was a really, impactful for me to see what difference each one of us in that room could make. And so that was kind of my legislative journey last year.
Okay, so to conclude our episode today, any words of advice for the pharmacy students who are watching currently?
All right. Well, thank you, Ryan. I just wanted to add a couple things. So couple pieces of advice that I wish were given to me is that a lot of times, when you're in school, you're so focused on the grade. So it's not about the grade. Obviously, you need to do well, but it's not about, I had to get an A plus or whatever. But you should be studying to actually really absorb and learn. So some of the big things is not just studying for the exam, but studying to learn. So I know your professors give you additional things to read, and I bet most people don't look at that and just focus on the lecture slides. But there is a reason, if you have guidelines and you actually look at treatment guidelines ahead of time, or if you open up that DPhT book and you read that ahead of time, you will go into lecture more prepared, and you'll actually learn instead of just studying for an exam. Because the whole thing is that what you're learning, you need to remember from when you're in practice to be able to help patients. And one of the big things is every patient, treat them like a family member. And that's why when you're studying, think about that. Each person that I'll be helping in the future could be potentially somebody's family member. And I want to, really know what I'm doing and not just, I got to get these good grades, right? So I would invest the time in actually having that deeper learning. And so that's one of the pieces of advice. But at the same time, the other advice that I want to give is, your classmates, these are people who are going to be with you for, depending on what school you go to, 3 or 4 years. and they could be lifelong friends. So when I was in pharmacy school, some of my closest friends were from pharmacy school. So and it's such a small world in pharmacy that your classmates could potentially be people who you work with in the future out in practice, or they might be somebody you interview with who's going to give you a job. So you want to make those connections. And so not just studying, but being involved. So, and Kathryn is a great example of being involved. She's like, on the opposite end, like super involved, which is amazing. So don't just, if you're able to be involved, I would be involved because it will help make you a more well-rounded pharmacist in the future, and it will build those leadership skills that you'll need as a pharmacist as well. And hopefully, some of you will be thinking about advocacy if you have not been thinking about it before this talk today. So those are the big pieces of advice that I just wanted to give.
Any add-ons, Kathryn?
Yeah, no, I think I just kind of want to piggyback off of being involved and making friends. I think they kind of go hand in hand. Like, the more you get involved in student organizations, like those people, like you're working together on projects and you're going to school together. Like, those are the people that you're going to build those really strong friendships with. And I think when you're choosing what to get involved with is to stay true to what you want. When you're going through pharmacy school, there's a lot of like so many people who are like, I'm doing this thing and it sounds cool. I'm doing this thing. And you kind of can get caught up in what everyone else is doing. And I think you just have to take the moment to remind yourself, like, what makes you happy? What do you want to get out of your 3 or 4 years of pharmacy school? And then prioritizing that. And then if something someone else is doing sounds cool and you want to explore it, go ahead, but like make sure that it's something you want and you're not just doing it because of someone else and what they're doing. Is really try and stay true to yourself, and then you'll make friends that you have you know similar interests with, because you're going to get involved in what you like, they like it too, and so you can learn and support each other then on your career journeys as you go to take those next steps in residency, job applications, and all of that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Alipour and Kathryn, for great advice. I'm sure that, a lot of students will hear this and will be just wondering, how they can get more involved and how to, focus on learning for life instead of just learning for the course. So I think thank you both for joining me today, and I hope our viewers have enjoyed you guys' stories, and I hope to see you both at the next OCPHA Legislative Committee, which I think recording date now is this upcoming Thursday. So remember to hit a like if you enjoy it, comment and share this with your peers. Click the subscribe if our notification bell for our latest content. Go give a follow on our Instagram and to show your support. Thank you everyone for watching, and we'll see you next week for our season finale.